Africa, I gave a topic that I would like to present here, which is fundamental to why we are here in 1975 after the Feast of Trumpets. So many of you knew that there was a general thinking in the church that the crisis would befall the United States and the church by 1972. And I want to address that question, though it is not passé in one sense. I think it holds the key to many of the problems and some of the doubts that people have had. For if we had understood in advance what was to occur in 1972, which did in fact, we might well have understood in advance the trends that have taken place since, and we certainly would have seen the world events in a different light. I would like to have us go through the book of Revelation and take a look at the 10th chapter, which is the one chapter in the book of Revelation that for most of us we've never understood. In fact, had we understood the 10th chapter, we would never have focused in on 1972 as we did, but we would have seen it in an entirely different perspective and would have seen the state of mind of the church today. But we won't look at chapter 10 immediately. But we're going to look at the book of Revelation and see how chapter 10 fits in. Had we known it, there's a possibility that some who left would not have, and certainly we would have been much more aware. I want to draw attention to a fundamental principle that Mr. Gene Carter and I were just briefly discussing on the phone last night. I've known him since the first year, the second year of college. This is many, many years ago, at least about 1948. It's hard to realize how much time has gone by since. It's 27 years. One of the rules that any great economist will tell you, and I obtained this from the economic report that Messrs. Story and Book, we call it the Storybook Report, they're Canadians, have published. It may be summarized such as this: that economic or political or anything we anticipate often takes much longer to develop than we think it should. But once it begins to occur, it develops much faster than we anticipate. Now, in terms of prophecy, I think this is fundamental. That what we have thought would occur has taken much longer to develop. But when it begins to occur, it will reach a climax much faster than we anticipate. Let's put it down. I've stated it twice so you grasp the picture. We said in the 1950s the beast is rising. We had captions like this in the Plain Truth. I want to say, brethren, that's not true. The beast hasn't risen yet. I think we might as well face it. There was an indication that indeed it was going to on the basis of what was developing. And in 1953, of course, the remnants of the Nazi Party attempted to overthrow the West German government. But under Naumann, Naumann's efforts came to nothing. Most of you have forgotten all about it or never heard of it. There was a revolution, of course, in Berlin, East Berlin in 1953, and then we had the Hungarian Revolution in 1956. That just seems so recent, and yet that's 19 years ago. It's almost a generation ago. There was the Pope who vigorously was speaking out against communism, and all of that has changed. So that in reality, not only has the beast not appeared on the world scene, there aren't 10 nations organized yet, and this is 1975. So let us face the fact that often what we anticipate occurs much more slowly than we imagine. But when it begins to develop, it occurs much more rapidly because indeed the world situation is of such a nature today that actions must take place fast to prevent the kind of crisis that the nations all fear. But in the meantime, the economic power of nations is far greater, and governments are now willing to exercise economic power such as they were unwilling to do in 1929 through 1932, which led, of course, to the Great Depression that no one wants to go through again. Now, what we are saying then is that many of the things we anticipate a religious persecution. I think there's no question in terms of the biblical statements in chapter 12 of Revelation. But today, the religious power that we have foreseen as the institution behind it, that power is more divided, more confused than ever before. That in reality, every instrument that one might anticipate, such as the common market developing into a union that is perfect, that what may look like it one day may not necessarily look like it the next. Because the Bible didn't say it has to come out of the common market, but it surely did look like it in the 50s. It did look like it in much of the 60s, but as the 60s drew to a close, there could be doubts, and I have expressed severe doubts for now several years, in fact, that we will ever find the common market as the political basis for what is defined in Revelation 17, 18, 19. Now, the economic basis is obviously there. What we want to do, then, for the moment, is to go through the book of Revelation and to see where we are and to see the key that was in the 10th chapter that would have helped us to understand much more, because we didn't understand it. We, in fact, thought it referred to something in the future, when in reality it has an entirely different application. And had we known it, I would never have written the booklet, A True History of the True Church, as I did at its close. Instead of leaving the whole story of the congregation of Laodicea in doubt for the future, we would have been able to lay it out very plainly as to what the situation is. We didn't then see it. I want to go through the book of Revelation just briefly. Now, we're not going to discuss except to show where it is. And I assume that the majority of you are familiar with things in Revelation, but I'm going to assume that none of you knows it so well that what we ought to at least summarize some of the points as we go along so we know where we are. The book of Revelation is conveyed to the churches from Jesus Christ through John. But John writes to the 7 churches in Asia, verse 4, chapter 1. And in this letter, which is the cover letter to the 7 churches, there is also a message to 7 separate congregations in what was then the province of Asia, now Western Asia Minor or Turkey. And these 7 separate congregations have letters addressed to them in chapters 2 and 3. Now we recognize that, indeed, most congregations were all contemporary, and we are told at the close of each that whoever has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. So every age and every individual should give heed to the lessons that are recorded in each one of those, because there can always be congregations today, like any one of them, and there can always be individuals in a congregation who make the same mistakes that either the congregation or individuals in it made in those 7 churches in Asia Minor. And we have always said these 2 chapters have a dual application. I said so in the booklet. We have said so from the pulpit. There's some people who somehow didn't know that. But we also recognize that the reason why you proceed from Ephesus to Laodicea in the sequence is also the fact that you proceeded along the road from Ephesus to Laodicea as you went and as the message was delivered to each of the 7 churches. And each one of the churches had other cities. These were a part of the major mail route, the major trunk route of transportation. And you went from one to the other. And since the church has a sequence in time, as well as many different characteristics at any one time. We see in here the story of church history laid out. The experiences of those 7 churches were chosen to tell the story of the church through history. Now, God could have chosen Corinth, he could have chosen Athens and Thessalonica or Philippi or Troas or Colossae. He didn't do that. These 7 churches are to tell something very special. Anything else would have been repetitive. And God, looking down on these 7, found something significant historically through time as well. Then beginning in the 4th chapter, we now have the introduction to the vision itself. After this I looked and beheld the door was open in heaven, and John thinks of himself as now in spirit instead of living in flesh. And the experiences he had were unaccountable in his estimation if he were not in spirit. But it is all a vision, as you will ultimately see, because these are visions that he received, as he said in the very first chapter, while he was in the island of Patmos, and he sees himself as if he were spirit, and the throne of God in heaven is there. So now we have, as we go through, a warning to the church and a message to the church through time. 7 churches. Then we have a specific message that is conveyed to the church for the first time in detail. And this is a prophecy of events to happen such as not even Daniel was given. Now in this 4th chapter we have the background of the vision. And in the 5th chapter, we're told about a little book. Let me correct that. We're told about a scroll. And this scroll was of the nature of the scroll in that day, and there were seals that held different parts of it shut. Now, normally, there was only one seal on a scroll, and when that was broken, you could unwind the whole thing. But this was different. This had 7 different seals, so that you had to break all 7 to get the whole story. If you broke one, you only had one part of it. And there was a reason to focus in on singular events through time that should occur. Now, the one who was found worthy was Jesus the Christ, our Messiah, Lord and Master. He was without sin. If he had not been without sin, this message would not have been conveyed today to the church. God the Father did not determine or reveal everything through the prophet, and he did it usually through Jesus in the Old Testament, like he did here through Jesus in the New. He then was not known as Jesus, but Yahweh, or the spokesman. And apparently in this case, though we are not told how much Father and Son may have discussed the future events, there were things that he has reserved to himself, and there are even things now apparently he has reserved to himself, that is, when he shall choose to make the decision to send Christ to earth, not revealed in the book of Revelation specifically. But here we are now given a message that adds to what Christ was given to reveal in Matthew 24 and the parallel verses in Mark and Luke. It was indeed a revelation that the Father gave to Christ to give to us. Now we note that in chapter 6 the seals are stripped off one by one. And you will note that you already have removed the 6th seal by the time you come to the 12th verse. Now, you've all read about it if you've read the key to the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation unveiled at last, as we published, but you read it right here in the Bible. Don't take for granted the rest of the story just because I say it here. There are 6 seals being stripped off here, and you can find the other 5 if you don't have them circled by number. But it shows you how rapidly the 6 seals are removed, all in a fraction of a chapter. Now, the first 5 seals, in other words, are discussed in the first 11 verses. And the sixth seal now takes a little longer, and you'll note that the seventh seal begins with chapter 8, verse 1. I'll have you look so you know where it is. So you take a note that the sixth seal takes us through more than a chapter, from chapter 6, verse 12, through the 7th chapter. That's longer than the first 5 seals altogether in terms of text. And then the 7th seal covers everything in the rest of the book of Revelation, beginning with chapter 8. All right, now we take note of some things. We don't know what language was written on this scroll. I certainly wouldn't conceive of it to be Koine Greek. There's no evidence that it was either Aramaic, which is some parts of the Old Testament, or Hebrew. But whatever language God the Father, Jesus Christ, and angels communicate with, that was on the scroll. Their normal means of communication would seem to be basically logical. But what happens every time a seal is removed, then John says, take a look. I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, or seal number 1, verse 1 of chapter 6. There was a noise of thunder, and 4 beasts were saying, come and see. And I saw, that's 4 living creatures of angelic origin, I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. Now, John is told here, it isn't told here, but he's told elsewhere to write what he sees. You have to go back to the first chapter. I won't go back to that. But John sees things in the presence of God's throne. And then he writes in Koine Greek, and we have it in English, what he sees. He is not given in the book of Revelation a copy of the scroll. There's no place in all of the book of Revelation which says to John that you don't have to write anything, but I will give you the scroll, and all you do is copy the scroll in as the book of Revelation. It isn't that way. The scroll is just, it's all in a vision, you see. And in this vision that occurs while he is a prisoner in the island of Patmos, he sees in this vision a scroll opened in heaven, and he's not reading off the scroll. Then when one seal is open, you see, the 4 living creatures in the vision say to John, look, and in this vision, John looks and sees things happening in God's throne, the presence of God's throne, and then he's told in the vision to write down in a book what he has seen. And so after the vision is over, he writes down what he has seen, and the whole thing is vividly presented. Now, whether he saw all this in one dream or not, we're not told. There does not appear to be breaks, but that is irrelevant. I don't think it is important to the story. It was that vivid, however, that he remembered all of this. You know, when you have this kind of vivid dream, it's very difficult to forget or to blot it out, even at 90 years of age. Now, the first 5 seals take us through a long period of history. If you please, roughly 19 centuries of time. I will not explain them. They have been explained before. But we come to the 6th seal, and there was a great earthquake and events that altered the traditional view of heavenly bodies as we see them. The sun becomes black, and as a consequence, the moon appears blood red in verse 12. And it would appear to be stars. Now, whether we can call these meteorites, they have the appearance of meteors shooting through the heavens. They fell to the earth. And there was a removal of heavenly bodies, like a scroll that is rolled up, and a time when every mountain and island is moved out of its place. And kings of the earth and great men and rich men and others are afraid because what they see is in fact some manifestation of God who sits on the throne and of Jesus Christ, who is about to pour his wrath out on the earth. And they admit now that the day of his wrath is come, and who will be able to stand? That is, they have been told these things, and they know, and now it's suddenly a realization that what they thought they could laugh off is going to happen after all. This is in the future. This follows the tribulation, which is described as the fifth seal. Now, in the tribulation described under the fifth seal, beginning in verse 9 and through verse 11, there are indications of two periods of persecution, one of which would be in the past, and the other which takes place, and is in a sense yet to take place, but just before the day of the Lord. And chapter 6 introduces the day of the Lord. The sixth seal introduces the day of the Lord here in chapter 6. Now we move along and we note that even though there may be a repetition of false prophets, I'll give you the summary of those, wars, famines, pestilence, tribulation, there's undoubtedly a repetition even of the seals as they're opened once through history and then climaxing in our time again. I think we can often see parallels. Certainly there have been such parallels beginning even with the Protestant Reformation. And the modern sequence of warfare leading up to the coming tribulation and then to the day of the Lord or God's intervention. Chapter 7. After these things I saw four angels standing on the four corners of the earth. These are like the four directions of the compass. We're not talking about a square, flat earth. We're talking in terms that we speak of like the setting of the sun in modern language or the directions of the compass. Now, what you discover is that the consequences of what would happen are temporarily postponed. Another angel ascends from the east having the seal of the living God. He says that there should be a delay to hurt not the earth, nor the sea, or trees, till the servants of our God are sealed in their foreheads, which has reference, of course, to having been given the Holy Spirit. Now, there are many people, in other words, who have come out of the Great Tribulation who are going to be called now because they realize that what has been said by this work today and what is going to be said by this work tomorrow and what will be said by the two witnesses in the tribulation, all of those things are true, and now they're going to act on it, and God gives them time, and so we have 12,000 of each of the 12 tribes, excluding Dan. That doesn't mean Dan is excluded, but it means there is also a great multitude of all nations, including Israel, including more than the 12,000 of each of the tribes and the tribe of Dan, because you have two groups, the specific number and then a great multitude of all nations. So God calls more than 12,000 of each, but he chooses. He called more than 12 disciples, but he chose 12, see. Now, the story of chapter 7 is a part of the sixth seal. We haven't come to the seventh seal, but it shows that there are events between the tribulation and the day of the Lord, and that there is even after the heavenly signs a delay, and God's wrath suddenly doesn't come on the earth. But more people are being called, converted, or many were being called, maybe a better way to put it, and some new ones. And now they are really being brought to a place of conversion as a result of what they had gone through. Yes, most of these people could have acted before, but there was no opportunity because of the kind of religious persecution. Spiritually, they are now virgins. We're not talking about physical virgins, we're talking about spiritual ones. This has nothing to do with their spiritual past. There isn't a single person in God's church who spiritually was a virgin before he was called. Because we all have been in one way or another a part of the world. And we become like the virgin that is the church. Excuse me. indication that if they're clothed with white robes in verse 9, that they have become forgiven and are now regarded as virgins. I think that should be very clear. These are people who are converted. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands, perhaps even a few million, are suddenly being converted, because if you have a great multitude that can't be numbered, and you could number 144,000, this must be so immense that there's no way to number them. Now, we're able to number all the people who come to the Feast of Tabernacles, but this is beyond the ability looking out to take numbers. And these people have gone through the tribulation. We're told in verse 14 they came out of great tribulation, they washed their robes, and have made them white in the blood of the Lamb. And we're told that the others, we're told of them also again in verse 9. They stood before the throne, they were clothed with white robes. So you have this picture there also. But God chooses a special group out of them, the 144,000, and out of all of these then God proposes to build up the work of his kingdom. What has been called in the last 19 centuries don't compare to this. And these people are ultimately those who will either hunger anymore or thirst anymore. Verse 16, the light of the sun will not be on them. Well, that clearly indicates they're to be ultimately composed of spirits, because we are subject to sunlight and suntan and sunburn, but when you're spirit, you are not. You don't live in the world of physical matter. God's calling all these because he needs them for the government or the kingdom of God. Now we come to chapter 8. And when he had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. Now, this is not because there are no women there. That's, of course, not the real explanation. But the wrath of God has come, and you know, not even the angels have seen God this angry. And when God is this angry, you don't approach him. God has waited all this time. There is a time to be angry and to put an end to sin. And God has reached the limit of his patience and is about to intervene. And so the seventh seal is opened, and here we have the seven angels standing before God with seven trumpets. And you see, that could have happened already beginning with chapter 7 in time, but it didn't. They were told to wait, not to act, till all these people were converted, so that between the tribulation and the day of the Lord there is a longer period of time than one might have anticipated. That is, why doesn't God intervene, is the question, see? And the answer is all these people are being called yet before this happens. Now we suddenly discover that the seven angels do sound. Verse 6. And the seven angels which had seven trumpets prepared themselves to sound. And then with chapter 8, verse 7, the first angel sounds. Verse 8, the second. Verse 10, the third. Verse 12, the fourth. And we have four angels who have already sounded, and we have finished the 8th chapter. But there are three more to sound, and these are called woes in verse 13. Now in chapter 9, the fifth angel sounds, verse 1. Chapter 9, verse 12, one woe is past, two to come. Verse 13, the sixth angel sounds. I'm going through the movement of time because I want you to see the movement. We're not interested in all these explanations because I'm focusing in on the 10th chapter, not every chapter. In other words, the seventh seal is made up of seven trumpet blasts, of which there are four introductory and three very terrible. Now, at this point in time, there has been a normal movement. There isn't any question that beginning with verse 6, we have moved moved from one seal to the next, and when we got to the last seal, save one, that is seal number 6, we are told that there was to be a brief postponement before the next one blows off. That is, the next seal is taken off and the trumpets blow. And a certain number of people are introduced who are being called. And now we're moving along under the 7th seal, and you have one trumpet after the other, and now you have 6 that have sounded. And the question is, what happens? Because we are not told that the 7th sounds until verse 15 of chapter 11. And the 7th angel sounded. So what we want to do is look at what happens in between. Now up to this point, John is seeing the focus on the book that Christ is opening. And when this scroll, rather than a book, is opened, then we have a picture of what happens based on what was written, and John then describes what he sees that happens. Now, we also know that as we proceed through the rest of the book, there are insects. That somehow other parts of the book don't continue the story flow without giving some background. And there is a break in the story. Now, we'll take an illustration of the break in the story in a moment. Chapter 12 is an illustration. Now there appeared a great wonder in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head was a crown of 12 stars. She was with child, travailed in birth, and there appeared another wonder, a dragon, and the woman produced the child. The dragon sought to devour the child, and she brought forth a man-child destined to rule the nations, verse 5, with a rod of iron, and the child was caught up to God to heaven. And the woman fled to the wilderness, verse 6. And there was another war in heaven which followed. The great dragon here fought against Michael. And now salvation has come, verse 10. And we're told, you see, that the devil, who at this time is very angry, goes to make war with the remnant of her seed, verse 17. Now when the woman flees the first time, in verse 6, it's for 1,260 days or years. And here, the last time she is given help, it's for a half a time, verse 14. So we discover that the woman flees twice. Now we've understood this before, because in reality, there is a tribulation of the Middle Ages that in a sense comes up to the tribulation but doesn't introduce the day of the Lord. That's like saying that when the seals were opened, it happened once, but it also happens again. Many things are dual in prophecy. But the next time it happens in full force, it will lead to the day of the Lord. The first time it didn't. Now, look at chapter 12, verse 1. There appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun. Now, this is an introduction. John sees something remarkable in heaven, and he describes it. And in chapter 13, we're told here of a beast that he sees rising out of the sea. Now, chapter 12 is the spiritual history of the church in simple one-chapter explanation with a focus on persecution and flight. And the devil seeking to destroy the church. Chapter 13 describes as an introduction the political power and the religious power. You will note it was given to this political power, verse 7, to make war with the saints. And the period of time was again 40 and 2 months, verse 5. And then there is a religious power who works with that individual who heads the political power. Chapter 12 is certainly an inset, all by itself, a separate story. Chapter 13 is an inset in two parts. In a sense, these modern chapters don't really tell the story. You could have had a separate chapter in more than one place, but we tend to say, well, a chapter should be so many verses, and that's the only reason it's done. This isn't original. This is done by men. So you really have an inset in... So it's an economic city power as well. Ancient Babylon was a religious center, it was a political, it was an economic center of the world. Chapter 19, and after these things I heard a great voice of much people, or a voice of many in heaven, and of course the whole vision takes place there. All the plagues are poured out in God's presence. Everything takes place. It isn't a question of people being in heaven. It's a question of where the vision is taking place. Salvation, glory, honor, power to the Lord our God. Excuse me. And now the church as a whole is pictured as having prepared itself ready to reign with Christ, who has come to rule and to punish the kings of the earth and their armies, verse 19. And I see another angel come down from heaven, chapter 20. And Satan is bound, and the saints reign. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, chapter 1 and verse 21. And then he shows something in chapter 22, which might just as well be a part of chapter 21, because those two really flow together very directly. And here in this last story, we have the holy city. Blessed are those who do his commandments, that they might have a right to the tree of life, verse 14. Because outside are dogs and sorcerers, that's homosexuals and sorcerers and whoremongers and murderers and idolaters and whoever loves and makes a lie or a falsehood. So that not everybody gets in. It's those who keep the commandments who do, verse 14. Now, the reason I went through all these chapters is to let you know something. That each one of the chapters, or if the chapter is not a proper division, maybe even inside, or maybe two chapters should have become one, but they're all introduced by a direct event. I saw a new heaven and a new earth. I saw an angel come down from heaven. I heard a great voice of multitudes, you see, of the people who are spirit in God's presence. I'm just going backward. After these things I saw another angel, and there came one of the seven angels, and he talked with me. And I heard a great voice out of the temple saying, and I saw another sign in heaven, and look, and behold, a lamb stood on Mount Zion, and here's the beast that comes out of the earth, and then a previous beast, those two things in chapter 13. And then there's the great wonder in heaven. These are all introductions of remarkable events that take us into the background and fill in the story, either religiously for the church, politically or economically, or religiously for the world. And now we want to look at chapter 11. We're going to work back to chapter 12. Now there was given me a reed like a rod, and the angel stood saying, Rise and measure the temple of God. Now when you look at chapter 11, verse 1, this is a most awkward way of introducing something new. Now I want you to note that beginning with chapter 12 and on, there is a clear break from what precedes. Now, we have taken for granted something everywhere in our explanation. That chapter 11 begins the first inset, and that chapter 10 is a continuation of chapter 9. We have taken for granted, that is, most of us, that chapter 11 begins with an inset. And yet it's the one chapter that doesn't have a logical break from what precedes. You you'll note that each one or the other is a clear break. There appears a wonder. Chapter 13 may have to have a new introduction. The text may vary there, but that's unimportant. There is a clear break wherever an event happens. In all of the others, when you have an inset chapter that tends to fill in the story in the background. Why then does chapter 11 not start with this kind of a break? It just says, and there was given me a reed like a rod, and the angel said, rise and measure the temple. After you have had the story of the sixth angel sounding the trumpet. Well, the answer to the question is this. Chapter 11 is an inset, but a part of an inset that begins with chapter 10. We have assumed that chapter 10 is a part of the sixth trumpet, and that 11 is the inset, and that was our mistake. The mistake was made because we didn't understand chapter 10 and therefore merely passed over it, because after all it says there were seven thunders, and what the seven thunders said was sealed up, so we rather passed over it, see? Because we didn't understand it. But now look at chapter 10, verse 1, and see if this is not, in fact, the same kind of inset we've had all along. And I saw another mighty angel. After six angels had blown a trumpet, but before the seventh one does, because the seventh doesn't sound until verse 15 of chapter 11, we now have an inset, because here is an angel out of sequence, right? Between the sixth and the seventh trumpet is an angel out of sequence who comes down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was upon his head. His face was as it were of the sun, and his feet as pillars of fire. And he had in his hand a little book, open. And he set his right hand upon the right foot upon the sea, and his left upon the earth, and cried with a loud voice as when a lion roars. And when he had cried, seven thunders uttered their voice. We have assumed, brethren, that all of this is a part of the sixth trumpet. This was our assumption, that all of this takes place well into the day of the Lord, which it doesn't at all, because this is an inset by another angel and not the angel that blew the sixth trumpet. Am I making that clear? And because chapter 11, the proper introduction, but John has just handed the read from where? With no setting at all. We should have begun the break with chapter 10, not chapter 11. Now when he cried with a loud voice, seven thunders uttered their voice, and when the thunders had uttered their voice, John was about to write, so that he understood what they were saying. But remember the story of Paul when he was called, there was a thunder, and Paul heard a voice and understood it, and others only heard the thunder. When Jesus heard, let's say when Jesus had the Father say, you know, you're my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased, the others heard and thought it was only thunder. There was the life, no, wait a minute, there was a Time magazine statement a number of years ago that said that Herbert W. Armstrong, you know, thunders the message of the world tomorrow. That was correct. They heard the thunder. They understood not the voice. They were more prophetic than you realize, as we now shall look. And when this happened, John was about to write. And then he hears a voice from heaven saying, you know, all this takes place in heaven because this is the origin of these events, not the earth. The angel comes down from heaven because that's the origin. But what happens is a message that is conveyed to the earth. And then John hears another voice from heaven say, seal up the things which the seven thunders have uttered and write them not. So he's told, don't write them. It's not something that has to be written. And the angel which I saw stand upon the sea and the earth lifted up his hand to the heaven and swore by him that lives forever and ever, who created the heaven and all the things in it, the earth and the sea, that there should now be no longer any delay after the seven thunders felt. There should no longer be any delay. Now, the statement "there should be time no longer" is not an accurate translation in terms of the meaning of the word in English. The sense is there's no longer a delay of one thing just gradually taking place so much later than expected. But in the days of the voice of the seventh angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God should be finished, as he has declared to his servants the prophets. So we have an indication, if you please, of the seven thunders continuing, you see, to the point in time that we finish the story with the sixth trumpet, and in the days of the voice of the seventh angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God should be finished, that is the calling of the church. That is why do we have over 19 centuries in which God has cast off the Jewish nation as a whole and seems not to be at work, as is declared to the servants the prophets. And the voice which I heard from heaven spoke to me again and said, "Go and take the little book, which is open in the hand of the angel which stood upon the sea and upon the earth." And I went to the angel and said to him, now I haven't explained all of this yet. All I'm going to do at the moment is just summarize and then pick right up again. But utter their voice. Now we know there's coming a time when there shall be a famine of the word of God. That's not described here, it's described in Amos. He says, not a famine of food, but of hearing the word of God. I just mentioned that in proceeding. But now we're told that after the seven thunders have uttered their voice, there would no longer be a delay, as we had a delay described in the 7th chapter. But when the seventh angel sounds, the whole thing would be finished. Now in the meantime, the voice which I heard from heaven said to me again, "Go and take the little book, open in the hand of the angel." And I went to the angel, said to him, "Give me the little book." And he said to me, "Take it and eat it." Now this couldn't be the book of life, because we're not eating the book of life. The man shall live by what? Every word of God. He doesn't live by bread alone. Now it's going to be in your mouth sweet as honey. And I took the little book out of the angel's hand and ate it, and it was in my mouth as sweet as honey. But as soon as I had eaten it, my stomach was bitter, because when he really understood and devoured it, and when he saw, in other words, and grasped what was to happen, it made him sick. Because he saw what was going to take place. And now he said to me, and let's not note the term chapter 11, let's just read. And he said to me, "You must prophesy again before many peoples and nations and tongues and kings." And there was given me a reed like a rod. And the angel stood and said, "Rise and measure the temple of God and the altar and those that worship therein." Now you see, what we have done was to split it here, because chapter 11 was written there, without realizing that chapter 10 and 11 fit together when you read it just like this. Because there isn't some wonder in heaven or wonder in earth that introduces chapter 11, is there? Therefore, chapter 11 is part of a total inset that is a part of sin and not separate. And the inset begins with chapter 10. Just like chapter 12 is a separate inset, and chapter 13 has two parts, two beats. And chapters 18, and 17, they're all really a part of the whole thing. Now we understand that the Gentiles will tread down the city for 42 months. And I will give power to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for this duration. Two witnesses. And they have power to do this. And the two witnesses are ultimately killed, Now you understand much of the background of this chapter, but I want to go backward again, because when you see, as you move in time backward, you'll find what really happens in chapter 10. Now there was a great voice after the two witnesses had been killed and were dead for 3.5 days, verse 11. The Spirit of life from God entered them. They stood on their feet. In chapter 11, verse 12 says, "Come up hither." And they ascended to heaven in the clouds. The same hour was a great earthquake. The second woe was past, verse 14. And the seventh angel sounds, verse 15. And we now read, the nations were angry, verse 18, and your wrath is come, and the time of the nations. It's incorrect to read it as dead. It should be nations, ethnos, not necros. And the time of the nations that they should be judged. That's the original reading in the Greek. And that you should give reward to your servants, the prophets, and the saints, to those who fear God's name, small and great, and those who should destroy the earth should be destroyed. All right, that's the close. The seventh angel sounds, the seventh trumpet. That's the return of Christ. That's the end of this incest. And now we go back for 3.5 years from essentially the seventh trumpet. We go back 3.5 years in time, and the two witnesses are speaking. Now, I want you to note that chapter 11 talks about two witnesses. And there is certainly a focus on Jerusalem and a temple. We don't have to define it for the moment. That's not relevant to the issue at this time. But I want you to note, before we are told that the two witnesses prophesy, we are told in chapter 10, verse 11, you must prophesy again before many peoples and nations and tongues and kings. Now, John apparently, in his day, John sees the vision, and it's all enacted through him. John had spoken throughout the history of the Church of God, from the time that Jesus sent his Spirit in AD 31 to somewhere here around 95, 96 AD. And then in this vision, he is told to eat a book, and he must prophesy again before peoples and nations and tongues and kings. And then we are introduced to two witnesses. Now the meaning of this should be very clear. That John, let's say, is pictured as the one who was spoken before, and now he's told to speak again. You note that the angel had a little book. And this is in verse 2. He cried with a loud voice, and there were 7 thunders. What those thunders said is not recorded. Then we are told that John should eat this little book, would be sweet in his mouth, be great to see it, but the result would be bitter in his stomach. Because what he would prophesy at the close would be a very terrible end to this world. And so he's told he must prophesy again, verse 11 as I read, and then the two witnesses are described who do this very thing. The two witnesses are then described who do this very thing. Because they're speaking before the whole world, and the whole world sees their dead bodies, verse 9, didn't allow them to be put in their graves, were very happy when they were dead, sent gifts to one another. We discover, in other words, that the two witnesses then fulfill a task in the tribulation and into the day of the Lord that has not yet been finished. And since the two witnesses are pictured here as in a sense fulfilling the result of what John was told to do, prophesy again before many peoples and tongues and nations and kings, we may discern what then becomes the big surprise when we look at the whole thing. But the 7 thunders are finished before the two witnesses speak. Whereas we have assumed heretofore that the 7 thunders were somewhat of the 6th trumpet that the two witnesses beginning at the tribulation. And we had assumed that chapter 10 followed chapter 9. instead of following on properly, but chapter 11 follows chapter 10 as an inset. Therefore, we must conclude, in looking at the layout here, that the seven thunders are not a part of the sixth trumpet, but precede the two witnesses. In fact, the seven thunders then can be nothing else since they are the result of that little book. And I have a copy of that little book. Whether you believe it or not, you will someday. John was told, we're all told, that we must live by every word of God, and man does not live by bread alone. We must absorb this book as one would, in a sense, eat. In this case, this book in the vision was like something you could literally eat. Now, we don't eat paper, but we are to live by this just as you live by bread. Then we now conclude that the messages derived from the little book take two forms. One, they appear as seven thunders in sequence, because if you hear it 7 times, that's why you hear it 7. If they were all at once, you would have heard it once. But these are 7 thunders in sequence, followed by a redigestion, so to speak, of the book, and then the two witnesses. The 7 thunders now could represent only one thing if you have gone through the book of Revelation. John and his brother James were called the sons of thunder. Time magazine said that Mr. Herbert Armstrong thunders the message of the world tomorrow. The 7 thunders would therefore parallel the 7 churches and are the messages of the 7 churches. And if we had known this, brethren, we would have known that the 7th church, or Laodicea, would also have spoken before the tribulation. We assume, brethren, so let's acknowledge that Mr. Kubik and I were discussing the fact that sometimes it's good, I'm not bearing my breath, like, tearing the garments, only have this one shirt and one other on the ship. And it wouldn't impress you anyway, because this is not our culture. That when the 6th church, the church of Philadelphia, was finished, that somehow, we didn't know how, because we looked around and didn't see it at that time, that somehow the congregation of Laodicea must be the people who, as co-workers, didn't go far enough, or people who were on the periphery, who will go into the Great Tribulation. And we pictured the Church of Laodicea as an organization that exists in the tribulation, see, at the time the two witnesses were speaking, because we thought that the Church of Philadelphia, described in chapter 3, the midpoint of the book of Revelation, would somehow end the work of God till the tribulation. Because we could not imagine ourselves becoming anything else. But we didn't understand the 10th chapter. If we had, we would have seen that indeed all 7 thunders utter their voice. All messages of the 7 churches, in fact, have spoken. And then John is told, eat this book, because you're still to speak some more. So that after the 7 thunders, the messages of the 7 churches have been conveyed to the world. And the messages in the book of Revelation, chapters 2 and 3, are to the churches. But each one of the churches has a message to convey to the world. Because that's their mission, that's their purpose, to bear a message to the world. This has been done in the days of the apostles. It was done during the time of Peter Waldo. It was done during the time of Constantine Maninales. It was done during the Church of God's Seventh Day in the 1910s and 20s. It has been done in the 30s till now the 70s. In different forms, in different fashions. Some thunderclaps are very loud and near, and others are very distant and weak. And it all depends on the strength of the church, spiritually. We've made the churches, and then the tribulation during which the two witnesses would be speaking into the day of the Lord, because we didn't understand chapter 10. Chapter 10 is an inset that tells us what the churches would be doing during the time that everything has been happening from chapter 6 to chapter 9. And the inset doesn't begin with 11, it begins with 10. The seven thunders don't have to be recorded, because in reality it is unimportant that we should have to repeat the individual messages of each one of the churches to the world. The people in the Middle Ages didn't have to be concerned if they had heard that we were speaking about a Hitler or a Mussolini. We don't have to know that the church in the Middle Ages may have been speaking about Frederick the Great, or Napoleon, or Charlemagne. These were irrelevant. In fact, God may have not even decided who should play that role. Sometimes individuals fell into these roles because they wanted to. And what one did not, another one could have. In any case, there was no reason to repeat many of the individual messages through time, because after all, the main message is already in the Bible, and then prophecy is given, and that's why it is not recorded here. We assume because it wasn't, it must be some message yet to be unfolded in the day of the Lord. For as you see, the sequence now becomes very clear that the little book is the Bible, and the seven thunders could have no other parallel. Now, if you can find some other parallel, you tell me. But there must be a parallel of seven thunders before the two witnesses, because they have already uttered their voice, and then John is given the little book, told to speak again before men, and then he's also given a reed that introduces us to the very events right in and around Jerusalem, where the presence of the two witnesses are and the Gentiles are. And they speak again for 3.5 years, approximately. And it ends with the return of Christ. We may now look back on the history of this church. There was a time in the 1950s we would have sermons like Mr. Blackwell's on the Laodicean. And in the 1960s, Mr. Armstrong would sometimes ask the question, brethren, are only half of you converted? No. It wasn't like that. He only asked the question as a warning. Because the church was characterized as the Church of Philadelphia. That was essentially the basic state of mind. Some were lukewarm spiritually in their personal lives, worked hard to work. Some were dead spiritually, though they had a name, they sat among us. Some had lost their first love, some had hung on to one heresy or another. Some had been involved in fornication or whatever it might have been. Every one of the sins of the seven churches we could have had individually in our midst, but the characteristics of the churches were very clear. A church that basically was dead brought us to the early 1930s. Then a church which was small in number was called, and before whom God opened many doors. And there are people like that in each of those churches today. There are people alive in the Church of God Seventh Day who are spiritually dead, especially at the top, much less so at the bottom. And when Christ comes, it will be a surprise to them. But it says very plain in chapter 4. There are people without any question. In chapter, I didn't even start at chapter 2 of the book of Revelation. To the Philadelphia era, God says, I will open the doors before you, and you must be patient, and I will provide you with protection during the time that is going to try the whole world. That's why we thought we would go right up there. Yes, indeed we are. There are people like that, of that Philadelphia state of mind, who are continuing to do the work that we have always done. But, brethren, beginning in 1972, a state of mind has been growing and has been setting in the church. It's not heresy. Because the church of Laodicea is not defined as subject to heresy. That's not its characteristic. Its characteristic is that it appears to be rich and increased with goods and not really having need of anything, but is spiritually miserable, poor, blind, and naked. That it is a church which is neither hot water on a cold day or cold water on a hot day, but is lukewarm. And it is not like the tares who are gathered to be burned, who are not wheat, but it's people that you can't separate because they're not guilty of heresy. They have the Spirit of God, or they couldn't even be the church, but they've been begotten and they don't grow, and Christ stands at the door and knocks. And he knocks in the following fashion. He says, "Let me come in and I will sit down with you and sup with you," right? Now he's talking about the individual, personal lives of people. You get my point? He doesn't say, now, like you read in the other, "I have somewhat against you. If you allow this and that and something else." This is a group of people and a state of mind of those whom God calls. For individuals don't let Christ live his personal life in them, where he has to stand outside, or to put it in its actual terms, when you are seated inside your home at your table with your husband or your wife or your friends or your children, you're drinking too much beer, you're eating things you ought not, you're saying things you should not, thinking thoughts you ought never to do. It's no wonder Christ is at the door. Because if he were there, you'd have to change the conversation. And many a woman would change the menu. What you'd be saying to your husband or to your wife, what you'd be saying to your parents is children to parents. And you would change the subject immediately if Christ came in. That's the state of mind of Laodicea. Brethren, that's the state of mind which leads people in God's church to separate from one another and to divorce, to when there is no justification, no porneia, no fraud. That's what leads people to accuse each other in the church. Or, as I have found on my trips, and I've found here in the United States before, husbands who see nothing good in their wives, wives who see nothing good in their husbands. Parents who are not concerned about children, children who couldn't be concerned less toward parents. The church of Laodicea is a picture of family breakdown because it's related to what you are doing at your table, where you are eating and Christ is standing outside at the door and knocking. It has nothing to do with the pulpit. It has nothing to do with heresy. It is a state of mind reflecting this last part of the 20th century that is creeping into the church. I saw it beginning, and I told Mr. Albert Fortune in his home in January 1972, and Mr. Neff was there. But I had to conclude. So we didn't have to look among Seventh-day Adventists or any other group outside, but Laodicea has come into our midst. And this is why the story ends with 5 wise and 5 foolish virgins. They're all virgins. There's not 5 virgins and 5 prostitutes. Why, there are 2 at the mill, 2 grinders, 2 asleep, 1 is taken, the other is left. That's the ultimate state of affairs. And it began at the close. The 19-year time period. It began very clearly and was clearly noticeable in 1972. In fact, it was so noticeable at headquarters that everyone knew that something had taken place and they didn't know what. Let me make it plain, Mr. Barnett Armstrong was not there then.
He was learning his own lesson somewhere else. And those who were, and who allowed it, the man who was fundamentally responsible at that time, is now gone. Very sad. But now we're living in a state of mind where, in a sense, Mr. Herbert Armstrong long since gave up the battle. Because there was no way to spend this kind of time. In 1971, 72, 73, he was speaking very prominently about the struggle between the permissive and those who were not permissive. I don't use the term liberal and conservative because it's an unfortunate misuse of terminology by the way we use it today. Those who were permissive and those who were not. Now, the interesting thing is we're dealing with human nature. And we discovered that you can't say that all of you, to my right, are not permissive, and all of you are always permissive to my left. It doesn't work out that way. Because sometimes you may be very, very careful on some points and very permissive on others. Some people are more permissive than others, but we're not always the same on everything. And Mr. Armstrong finally was aware of the fact that we couldn't say either to laymen or to ministers that you're permissive here, but you're not, that you're always permissive and therefore have to be put out. It's not something we could act on in terms of church government. And that's why it has occurred in our midst. Because there was no way to stop it. It is the result of living in this century with the impact of wealth and prosperity, of television, the movies, the radio, the newspapers, the magazines, the paperbacks, the schools, the churches, everything. There was a time when people could come to this congregation and they'd ask us questions about the Bible. Now their only concern is about their own problems. There was a time when the minister, if he left his Bible in the briefcase in the car, within 10 minutes, as we used to say, both the individuals in the home and the minister knew he had forgotten it. Today, if you did the same thing, when the meeting is over, neither person has realized it. Because they weren't talking about what the Bible was saying. They were only discussing their problems. That's our society. There was a time we would ask people, and that's why I'm sure Christ allowed the ruling on divorce to stand as long as it did, even if it were erroneous and shouldn't have been. There was a time that we would say to people who had been divorced and remarried and divorced and or remarried, didn't your parents warn you? Didn't your teacher say something? Didn't your minister? Didn't your friends? Yes. So we went and did it anyway. Today we ask the same question. Didn't your parents warn you? Didn't your minister? Didn't your teacher? Didn't your friends? Oh, no. Nobody ever told us it was wrong. But everybody else was doing it. We didn't know. Now, admittedly, there was an error administratively. But Christ sometimes allows it for the simple reason that most people in the 30s and 40s and 50s, yes, even into the 60s, who are involved in sex sin, that's what it is. They knew better. Now, some were innocent victims and did pay a very heavy penalty because of mistaken judgment and decision of the church, where we were wrong and we should acknowledge it. We didn't imagine that Christ would let this kind of a mistake be made at the highest level in Mr. Armstrong thinking. But brethren, the fact remains that most people who were involved in sex before marriage knew better and were guilty because they knew better before they did it. And today they don't, because it's the thing, the in thing to do. And it's now come to the place where Christ could not even allow this kind of administration to go on because people don't know any better. What we're saying is that there is this great trend and shift in society, and it inevitably comes into the church. There are people who, to this day, wouldn't want their private lives known in terms of their public. Mr. Armstrong said to me, now probably 1 to 2 years ago in his office. I don't have many private talks with him, maybe once or twice a year for that matter. He said 3 words and 3 words only to me on this subject, and you pass to another. And I didn't say anything to him. And you can quote him. Laodicea is here. The 7th thunder is being thundered around the world. And it's done at the same time. There are 2 kinds of people, 5 wise and 5 foolish, are side by side. Ultimately, I don't think it's that percentage now. I think it's much more like 7 to 3. It will soon be 6 to 4, and then it's 5 to 5. That's the way it will go. Started out probably 9 to 1, and 8 to 2, and it's moving in that direction because more and more people are coming in. And don't assume that just because you came in since 72, and let me clarify that so nobody misunderstands. I'm just saying you have a far greater problem if you are younger and influenced no matter when you are converted than people who went through the Great Depression of the 1930s and the Second World War period or the Korean War. But we are all influenced by the same television. I don't care what your age. But there's a greater danger, inevitably, if you're younger and never lived through the crisis of the 30s and the 40s or the earliest 50s, when you are wholly influenced by all the modern environment, there's a danger. But 2 congregations are in our midst, and there's another one not in our fellowship, the Church of God Seventh-day, like the Sardis era. We're all free on earth now, at least, if not fragments of earlier remnants somewhere in Europe and the Middle East. That I won't address. But 2 people are doing this work. God has set an open door before the congregation of Philadelphia. And we are to complete a task, but we didn't know that somewhere in the middle everything would be stopped as it was temporarily between 71 and 72. In the personal life and the crisis in Mr. Armstrong's life. And it was at that time in the administration of some men who are not now administering that this other friend took root. And one of the intents of that was to oust Mr. Ted Armstrong and to oust Mr. Herbert Armstrong. It didn't work. God opened the door before Philadelphia and he will choose to close it. But just because the peculiar characteristic of our society, and therefore it's going to take place in the church, because God calls people out of society, and when you're buried in baptism, you don't change everything. You may attempt to, but you don't. There are many things you carry and still have to repent of as the knowledge comes. But probably Paducah is less influenced than Hollywood is by the world. I think Kentucky is not the leader in Laodicea, even in the world around us. I think that's just the nature of our environment. But I want to warn you that this is the drift. And therefore, be very careful how you sit in judgment, because with what judgment you judge others, you're going to be judged. But you have to realize that God purposed to call people now where this becomes the permissive, and those who are not so permissive are here together. The work must be finished. The 7 thunders utter their voice, and then the 2 witnesses. Because we now see that the introduction to the 2 witnesses in chapter 11 began not with verse 1 of chapter 11, but with verse 1 of chapter 10. I hope, brethren, that you see this perspective, because it answers many questions. I think it would lay aside many doubts. When we are face to face with reality in our midst, it doesn't change the spiritual state of those who are faithfully doing the work and who faithfully let Christ live his life in them and who will be delivered. when Mr. Armstrong has to warn that a lot of people in our midst are not going to be delivered, that's also true. And some of the things that you think you have heard that are contradictory are because there are two kinds of people in the church today, at least two major ones. Those where Christ lives his life in them, and those where he stands at the door and knocks. Now, if you have ears to hear and eyes to see, you will let Christ in if he isn't there. You will pick up the conversation at the table, just where you left it off, and in fact, ask Christ to answer some of the very questions you were discussing. You won't embarrassingly suggest you change the topic. And that's the difference in the attitude. The condition of attitude of heart and mind.